Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Development Control and Regulatory Board on this day, Thursday, the 13th of December. I would like to remind everyone that everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing on the County Council website after the meeting. Please, when you turn your microphone on when you are speaking and turn it off when you have finished. Regarding membership of the committee today, we're mainly all present and correct, other than Mrs. Fryer is substituting for Councillor Gillard, and Mr. Parton sends his apologies for not attending the meeting.
Chairman, my apologies for interrupting, but may I point something out? I note we have two speakers this afternoon who both wish to speak on the same item, which is the item that any urgent items that you are bringing forward and not one of the agenda items.
It's agenda item number 7. Paper said or what?
There's item 9.
No. Okay, well, the people will speak when we get to the right item anyway. Okay. Moving on to the agenda then, item number 1 is minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November. Has anyone got any queries with that? Dan?
I just move them,
Moved. Seconded by Mr. Crooks. Thank you very much. Item 2 is question time. We've received there are no questions. Number 3, questions asked by members under standing orders. We haven't any of those either. Item number 4, to advise of any other item which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. There's nothing on that either. Declarations of interest. It is noted that members who are also members of a parish, town or district council or liaison committee will have a personal interest in those applications which relate to areas covered by those authorities. Are there any further declarations at this time? That seems to be no year. Item number 6, presentation of petitions. No petitions have been received. Item number 7 then is the Barrow Hill application for recycling to take place there. We did go on a site visit on Tuesday to this site at the request of Mrs. Richards, the local county council member for that ward, which was a worthwhile visit in my view, because we at least saw what the situation was there, and I think it was very helpful. I'm pleased that she asked for it to take place. Mr. Bond, you're going to present this. Would you please do so? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the restoration of Barrow Hill Quarry back to an agricultural use using inert waste with some additional recycling taking place also. Barrow Hill Quarry was last quarried in the 1950s, we think, has been subject to partial tipping in the sort of 1970s time, but has been left unrestored. It looks like it's currently being used unlawfully by off-road bicycle or motorbikes and cars, but ultimately it needs restoring. The quarry itself is located southeast of Earl Shilton, and it's accessed only by Mill Lane, which is a public highway accessed off the A47 Clickers Way. So that's the A47 coming around here, and that's Mill Lane coming down to the quarry, which is this red area there. Mill Lane's a Fairfield Farm, which is here at the top end, which is a residence and a livery yard. Beyond that, it's a single track road with many potholes therein. The site would be reprofiled back to contours that were close to surrounding ground levels. As part of the development, a new access will be created to the north of the site, which is just here, rather than using the existing access, which is down on the southeast, cutting out this big bend there. And engineering material will be imported to create a geological barrier both at the bottom and the base and along the sides of Barrow Hill Quarry. Following the geological barrier, inert waste would be imported, some of which would be recycled and then exported from site, but ultimately inert waste would be tipped in the site to restore the land back to acceptable levels suitable for agricultural use. In total, the applicant proposes importing 94,000 cubic metres of material to complete the project, with a maximum of 25 HGVs in and 25 HGVs there out per day for a maximum of 4 years. The infilling and importation will be in a phased manner, with additional hedges planted to replace sections of chain link fencing which is unsuitable and unsightly in this rural location. Off-site improvements would also be made to temporarily widen Mill Lane in several locations, and signage would be in place along Mill Lane and potentially Clickers Way, advising HGVs and other road users of the development and the potential for conflict. In terms of policy MCS 17 of the Minerals Development Framework Core Strategy and policy WDC 15 of the Waste Development Framework Core Strategy both seek to reclaim mineral sites and waste sites back to a high quality reclamation standard as soon as practical. As a standalone recycling facility in this location, it would not be supported due to where it is. It's way outside any areas that we would consider acceptable, but on a temporary basis, as part of the infilling operation, it is deemed that recycling in this location can be acceptable. So there's strong in-principle support from strategic policies for the restoration of the site, but members need to consider the impacts that will be created by doing so. 6 representations have been received, all raising concerns about the condition of Mill Lane, including its narrowness and the potential for conflict with HGVs and other lawful users such as horse riders, pedestrians. The owner of Murfield Farm, previously pointed out, has expressed strong concerns about the potential negative impacts on the livery yard due to noise and safety concerns of HGVs accessing Mill Lane very close to their operational livery yard, which includes a menage, and also horses using Mill Lane, potential conflict there. In terms of highway safety, the Highway Authority has assessed this application in great detail and raises no objection subject to the off-site works that are being proposed and other conditions. It is hard to quantify safety and financial risks to local businesses and users of Mill Lane, but members have to consider that this is a public highway which all traffic is normally permitted. There are no objections from any statutory consultees, and from an operational point of view there is no particular concerns with regard to noise, dust, other impacts from actually the reclamation of the quarry itself. But there will be some impacts from the proposal, and these would mainly be on Mill Lane and the users of that road. It is considered that subject to a temporary permission and subject to the conditions proposed and a planning obligation covering off-site works, including highway signage, widening, acoustic fencing and surface improvements and management, that overall, on balance, the application should be approved. Members will note the proposed amendments to the conditions. They've had a recent update sheet. There's also been further discussions taking place today between the Highway Authority, the Public Rights of Way team and planning officers. And looking at condition 20 that's in front of you at the back of the report, it is considered that this condition is now not needed, and the requirements that are important to the Rights of Way team are covered by condition 11. So it's proposed that the application be permitted subject to the amended conditions as per your amendment sheet, and that condition 20 be removed and subsequent conditions renumbered. And I think that's it, Chair. Thank you very much.
I think you've done then, Mr. Bond.
Short and sweet.
Yep. Well, it was muted earlier in the meeting that we have speakers. We do have two speakers on this item. Councillor Richard Allen from Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council, and Mrs. Janice Richards, Leicestershire County Council. Mr. Allen, would you sit over there? You've been allocated 3 minutes to speak. After your 3 minutes, if you just remain there, just in case any member wants to ask a question about what you've said today, not about the report itself. So begin when you're ready. And
good afternoon, councillors, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to address the committee as ward member of Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council for Earl Shilton. I would like to start by saying that I have no objection in principle to the infill of Barrow Hill Quarry, as long as the operation is subject to very close inspection and control, particularly as Earl Shilton Recycling Limited is a newly formed enterprise, and the other interest of the named director is listed as being a hairdresser. I wouldn't have thought that was particularly relevant experience, but there we go. I would also query the need for this landfill site, given the currently unused extant permission to infill the big pit nearby in Hinckley. My objections relate to the proposed access using Mill Lane and the environmental impact on nearby residents and the open countryside surrounding the proposed site. The junction to Mill Lane off the A47 is located on a slight slope and a bend, which adversely affects motorist visibility on the de-restricted A47. And given that vehicles often travel at high speed on this main road, drivers encountering stationary or slow-moving HGVs turning into or out of Mill Lane, particularly in poor weather conditions, can be reasonably considered to pose a significant accident risk. Indeed, there was an accident there only last week. Mill Lane, for the majority of its length between the A47 and the proposal site, is unmetalled single-track country lane, and as such is completely unsuitable for use by heavy goods vehicles. The proposed peak traffic of 50 movements per day, plus the employee traffic, I would expect will render the track unusable within a few days. This proposal is contrary to DM17, which states that proposals should seek to ensure that there is convenient and safe access for walking and cycling. How can this be the case on a single width track with occasional passing places, particularly if you add horse riders into the mix? On that note, this proposal will, if it proceeds, devastate the long-standing and successful Hinckley Equestrian Centre, located close to the junction of Mill Lane and the A47, as you've seen on the map earlier. One of the proposed passing places is close to the kitchen window of Murfield Farm, and another is located close to the centre's menage. Anyone who knows anything about horses will realise that horses and HGVs in close proximity is an extremely dangerous mix, and as such would be contrary to DM10. Indeed, should this proposal proceed, the Equestrian Centre will have no option other than to relocate or close down, which would be a significant loss to the residents of the borough. Whilst considering DM10, which requires that an application would not have an adverse effect on the privacy and amenity of nearby occupiers, and should complement the character of the surrounding area.
Mr. Allen, you've run out of time on
I have?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
According to the man on the left, anyway.
Oh, I must have gone through
very
it
good
quicker
with
when I
his
timed
talk.
it myself.
Yeah.
I was almost done. But there we go.
Any questions for Mr. Allen? Councillor Jennings.
It's the equestrian centre that Councillor Allen has referred to. He said if the consent is granted, then he will either have to relocate or close down. Is there any evidence to support that?
Are you asking Mr. Allen, David, or yeah?
Yeah, but it's part of what he said. And I'm asking for clarification on that point. What evidence is there to substantiate it?
Thank you. Yep, the owners of Murfield Farm, the Equestrian Centre, they have a report by the British Equestrian Society which supports that having HGVs within probably 50 metres of a menage is dangerous. My understanding was that had been supplied to LCC, but if not, I'm sure they'd be happy to supply it.
Thank you for the reply. In that case, Chairman, can I ask our officers, have we seen sight of that?
I've been told we don't recall receiving it. Without going back to our files, I don't think I can give a definitive answer, but we're not aware of it.
Are you satisfied at that, David? Or
That is the answer we've been given, Chairman. Thank you.
anyone else? No. Thank you. I ask Janice Richards to come and sit in the chair. You've been allocated 5 minutes, Janice. You and all obviously time you and tell me. So start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and read my comments out. I've major concerns on the safety issues with this proposal. There was even an accident on the A47 at the junction of Mill Lane with a vehicle and a horse box only last week. Mill Lane may be classed as a highway, but the name speaks for itself. It is a lane and a very narrow lane. The family who live on that lane at Murfield Farm run a very busy, successful equestrian centre with 25 horses, and children also attend the centre. Deep concerns have been expressed by the family with the HGV travelling by the centre many times through the days for the next 4 years and have a devastating effect on their business. The owners are very disappointed that they cannot attend as they are away. And as this proposal has been put to come before the committee many times in the last 2 years, only to be withdrawn each time, now making it impossible for the owners to attend. I do believe comments have been sent into county with deep concerns regarding the impact on their business. There would be 50 HGV plus cars using this lane, and even with the proposed passing places, it will make it a dangerous country lane. How will this proposal interact with other vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians, and the horses also using the lane? On page 18, policy DM17 seeks to ensure there is a convenient and safe access for walking and cycling to services and facilities. Demonstrate that there is not a significant adverse effect upon the highways. It certainly does have an effect. Page 21, DM9, transport by road, states the highway network is able to accommodate the traffic that would be generated and would have an acceptable impact on the environment of local residents. It does not. How can this justify turning what amounts to be a footpath into a route for 50 HGV movements 6 days a week? Residents' environment would be unrecognisable. The applicant has submitted evidence to demonstrate that an adjacent landowner has given permission for drainage. However, the new scheme includes land outside of the original red lines and cannot be controlled by planning. The Rights of Way officer has raised strong concerns regarding potential conflicts with HGVs and other users of local rights of way, and states at the time of the visit the atrocious state of Mill Lane. He also seeks to provide safe routes for pedestrians and horse riders, and how the proposal may significantly affect making it impassable for the general public. There is further access to the site on a wider road that the farmer stated could be used, but highway officers thought the highway network was not acceptable. But I also believe that the access to Mill Lane is unsafe and totally unacceptable. This committee must see why I'm extremely disturbed by this proposal and many outstanding issues that may not have been addressed. So concerned for the safety of residents who use this lane, I ask that this proposal is not granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Any questions? Madam.
Thank you. Janice, I know the riding school couldn't be here, they're away on holiday, but could you just, is it a riding school or is it livery as well?
Both. And there's 25 horses there, and like I said, children use it, so it is a busy place with a track for training the horses as well.
And also, if I may, could you just describe, you mentioned about it being used by walkers, riders, cyclists. Could you just give us a little bit of historical information about who does use it, where they walk to? Because I know when we went on the site visit, there was, I think there's a route to Callagath, Potters Marston, and I just wanted a bit of information.
Thank you. I know children use it for the cycle track, and that I don't know whether some of the cycle tracks you saw or motorbikes that were coming or going from that site, I'm not sure, because I've never witnessed it. But we did see cycle tracks and motorbike tracks. So many walkers use it. I've walked myself many times, and also we go down to Potters Marsden for Christmas carols, and we always walk back that way with torches, and so it is used quite a lot by residents, and obviously the horses and cyclists as well. Does that answer your question, Councillor Wright? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? No, looks like you're free to go then, Janice. Yeah, Mr. Bond, you'd like to respond to that?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. With regard to the deterioration of the surface of Mill Lane following commencement of any development that's approved, as I understand it, the operator applicant would be required to enter into a legal agreement covering off-site works, including fixing the current potholes, widening the road, and then maintaining that road to a certain standard for the life of the development. So if HGVs did go down that road and create more problems or ruin the pothole repairs that have been made, they would be required to repair those again for the life of the development. And then finally, just another matter with regard to the drainage scheme that Councillor Richards referred to. She is very much correct that the Leeds Local Flood Authority have required a drainage scheme that needs land outside the current red line application. So they've got no objection in principle to that drainage scheme, and they support it, but because it's outside the red line of this application, it cannot be approved under this permission. So members will note that condition 15 is a Grampian style condition that restricts this development from even commencing until a further permission for that drainage work is approved. And then finally, just for members, I'll just wait for Ewan. Members will note that in terms of some of the policies referred to by Councillor Richards and Councillor Allen, there are some alternatives available in the area. So this pink line that runs, or purple should I say, it runs round Murfield Farm is a public, it's a footpath, thank you, John, a public footpath. So there is an alternative for walkers in the area, although it is understood that and appreciated that some may choose to use Mill Lane and some horse riders may choose to use Mill Lane. There are bridleways in the area. There's one that goes through Yenards and finishes at the north of the site. There's also a bridleway that comes out at the top of Murfield Farm, top of Mill Lane, and comes south along Clicker's Way there. That's me done, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. There are a supplementary report and a letter that's been supplied to all of us to go with the main agenda report, which we've all got. Because of the sensitivity of the application with this access road, we have got some highways officers here today. I haven't asked them to do a presentation on what the proposal, but they're here to answer questions really of anyone that's got any queries with the access road and the development in, well, just really the access road. The development is part of Mr. Bond's. So it's open to members now then. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Chair. I actually went, I know I am standing in for someone today, but I did go out on the site visit and I have thoroughly read all the paperwork that has been provided. I would just like clarification. I think some may be from Mr. Bond, but some may be from the officers from the highways. One of the conditions is that the road will be widened and surfaced. Well, when I say surfaced, I think the officer has just explained the potholes will be filled in, which often doesn't mean that the surface is improved at all because they break down again. When we were on the minibus on Tuesday, I'm not sure how it would be widened because there is a ditch on either side, as far as I could see. So that is a concern. I also would like to know if it's possible to alter the times of operation. Basically, at the moment, it says it's 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, Monday to Friday, and 7 o'clock till 1 o'clock on a Saturday. Is there a possibility that could be changed from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. and no working on a Saturday? I think this could mitigate some of the problems with the people that use this lane as a highway footpath with access also to for obviously the bikes and everything that's going down as well. So, but if there was no working on a Saturday, that would give people a lot more time to use it without disturbance of the lorries. I am very concerned about the use of them up to 50 vehicle movements a day, and I've done a rough calculation. My maths isn't brilliant, but it looks to me that the minimum weight of vehicle to cover the amount of material they want to move would be a minimum of 7.5 tons. Also, the officer mentioned about part of it is now used by a trial bike. On page 8, under paragraph 6, it says that the flooded southern quarry and an area to the east of the M69 is now owned and used by the Old Shilton Trial Club for trial bike riding. But when we were there on Tuesday, where we saw evidence of trial bike riding and vehicles, motor vehicles as well, is that the site, or is this another informal site that's been arranged? Because I must admit, I'm not familiar with this road in this area of the country, so I'm not quite sure. I did slightly lose track whether I was facing south or north at one time. Thank you.
I think we've got probably two questions there for Mr. Bond and probably one for highways. If you...
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the issue raised about the ditches to the side of Mill Lane. Councillor Fry is correct that there are ditches that run down either side in parts of Mill Lane, and it's my understanding that the Highway Authority have considered the proposed areas to be widened, which are the areas in red on the plan in front of them, and in doing so will have assessed the fact that there may well be ditches there, and under the the subsequent obligation and agreements that they will sign with the Highway Authority to make sure these works are done, I'm pretty sure that culverting will be required where necessary to make sure that pipe work is put in place before they put the temporary passing bays and widening works in. So from that perspective, I'm pretty comfortable with that. With regard to hours of operation, Councillor Fryer recommends 8 till 5 Monday to Friday, and that's it. From an officer point of view, I've got no particular issue with members if they decide that that's the most appropriate way forward. I think that's a matter of judgment on amenity grounds that you may wish to take. Moving on to the weight of HGVs, I quite agree that if you averaged out the weight of a vehicle needed, or the weight of the material on the vehicles, it would average out at about 7.5 tonnes. Now, an average 8-wheel truck will bring in 20 tonnes. This site is not intended to be open every day. The applicant has made that clear that there'll be certain times of the year when it doesn't open for weeks or maybe even a month or two, because of the nature of the material coming in is such that it's on a campaign basis. So they may win a contract to remove material from a building site, say. That material will come in, whatever can be recycled will be recycled and leave the site. The remainder will be used to infill. So an average HGV carrying this type of material is around the 20-tonne mark. And if they brought in 25 loads every day, Monday to Friday, they would probably fill it within 2 years. They're asked for 4 because they don't want to work every day. They don't think it's viable to be there every day because the material probably isn't going to be necessarily around every day. So I get the point that trying to raise ultimately 7.5 tonnes, I'm afraid, with 20-tonne HGVs. The sites that are used legally for off-road motorbikes and I guess 4x4s or whatever people want to use them, I will get to. Right, members will. That's the application site in red, and if you carry around this flooded quarry here to the south, the track continues under the M69, and this area here, as far as I know, has permission from the local authority for that use. And it looks to me like certain users of this have taken the opportunity to explore, I'm guessing without the agreement of the landowner, I can't say for definite, and use Barrow Hill Quarry, probably unlawfully.
Has Highways got anything to add to that at this time or not? Looks like no. Yes?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. I take Councillor Richards' points about the strength of the road currently and what will be required. The applicant scheme that was submitted was checked by engineering design colleagues who considered it appropriate to mitigate the impact of this development. With regard to strengthening the road to take the traffic required, this will be part of the detailed design process and subject to Section 278 technical process, which the applicant will have to be involved with the Highway Authority, and we would seek to get the required condition of the road upgraded to take the volume of HGV traffic likely to use that route to the quarry. So there are processes in place to ensure that that takes place.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I went on the site visit the other day, and I must admit the narrowness of the road really concerned me, and the fact that we've got a bridleway and 3 footpaths feeding into it. The short period we were there, we didn't see any horses, but we did see a number of walkers on the footpath. The fact that this is about 1 kilometre long and quite a large part of it can't be widened because it isn't wide. There isn't room to widen it unless you take some of the farmer's field. I think the conflict between horses and walkers and any other means of traffic that goes up and down there is going to be a major concern. the fact that we could have up to 50 lorries and 10 car movements a day, legally they could, not the, as the officers said, it's not going to be every day, but even one day sort of a week, with the amount of horses that could be using that, legally using that bridleway. Horses, as was said by one of the speakers, horses don't mix with traffic, let alone lorries, very well. And there's nowhere other than the small bypassing parts where you could get by a horse. So I personally don't like this at all, Chairman, and I would support turning it down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first impression was that we normally have accompanied with diagrams excellent pictures. Now I'm concerned because there's no pictures today, and if I hadn't have gone out on Tuesday, I'd have no idea. That doesn't say anything to us. All it is a plan and lines. But you go into that small vehicle that we were in, and it was virtually to the sides. And there's also slopes up. So if you're going to put height onto that to make it more stable, instead of going down, you're going to put pressure upon the side walls of the ditches that are there. Now, one of the experience was coming back, we encountered 4 walkers, as have already been mentioned, but one young woman spotted us and tried to get up a bank and slipped, not down badly, but you could see the anxiety in her face, and this was just a small vehicle that was taking the whole width. So if we're going to put 20-ton vehicles down there, it's going to be quite a considerable engineering task to be undertaken to do it properly. If we're talking about culverts and piping, it's a big undertaking to create an extra width. What amazed me first, Chairman, was the description as we pulled in. We said this is Mill Lane, the highway, and as we went down this bumpy track, I thought, well, probably in the 17th century, it'd have been a superhighway, but that not in this modern time to describe it as a highway. It's certainly not too good for the walkers and even the horses with some of the road conditions, but to put vehicles in, that is a real concern to me, a real concern, the way it is. I also notice that accompanied with this note from the stables, the comment is, has the company set aside assets for damages? Now obviously I've heard of no appropriate insurance policy. I've heard it's a new company, and the background of the directors is not in dispute that they're able to do the job. Not one bit, but if it is a new company, I'm concerned again, because if horses or pedestrians were affected or injured, or even a loss of life, it could be very serious, and I think that would be something that we should look at. I also think that the loss of business in damages to this stabling. It's an old established business to all information we've been given, and when we pause to look at it, you can see it seems to be well organised and maintained and on a decent scale. Now, you know, that's somebody's business and livelihood that's already there. It's established. Now what we're doing is accommodating another company to come in for business, for profit, and that's fine, that's good. But I am concerned about that, and I'm concerned that we've got traffic going up, and what I didn't realise, there'll be traffic coming down loaded as well. Now, if it was just vehicles going one way, then if it was particularly going in, people would walk, and if a vehicle came up behind them, horses, they'd have to wait until they were out on their journey in a way, it'd be safer. But now we've got the potential of 2 vehicles coming at 20 tonne a time. It really is a formula for some real concern when we talk of highways and physical movements it is quite serious, and I am concerned about this. I think if it was going to be feasible, if it was one way in and they're able to get out in another way, then it would have been much more sustainable. My other final concern, Chairman, is that I just got the feeling that this was a bit like a yard-based operation where they're taking certain amounts of product, regrind or whatever, and it's not just sort of turning up, unloading, levelling, and the thing goes on. The whole thing's projected, as we've had explanation, for 4 years. I understand that. But I mean, it is causing concern then, because you've got heavy vehicles loaded coming back out again, and they've got to merge onto that busy road, which is another consideration. They're not empty, they're loaded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. I can only really echo what Councillor Crooks has already said, and Councillor Harrison. I have grave concerns really on several points. The impact on the established business of the riding school. If it's livery as well, people aren't going to stable the horses down there because they can find alternatives. So that would have a straight impact on that business of the horses. I'm concerned about the lorries pulling onto Clickers Way, because it is a fast road. I know the road myself, and especially if they're taking material out, they're going to be heavy vehicles and they're going to be slow. I'm concerned about where there's talk about a wheel wash, but what will that wheel wash be? Will it be mechanical? And practically it would have to be based at the top of the lane, because if they're coming up that lane, it is very dirty anyway. So to have any practical impact, it would have to be located at the top. We've already heard from the two speakers around policy about DM9, DM10, DM17, and I would echo that. My biggest concern around this is safety of pedestrians, safety of cyclists, safety of horse riders. The fact that the lorries will be going up there on an ad hoc basis as well, for me, makes that worse. I think if you can get in a pattern and a routine, people get to know when lorry movements are, but the fact that they'll be going ad hoc and they're not there some weeks and not, people's guard comes down. So I'm afraid I agree in principle to this about, you know, filling in and everything, but on what I've seen, I have really grave concerns, and I can only echo what Councillor Crooks says, and I would be apt to refuse this. Just one question I'd like to ask the highways before I shut up is about the alternative route. And we've looked at I know the area, I know it's not practical to go down up the hill and come down through the villages, but, and I don't suppose it's variably economic to come off Clickers Way, because if you look on, I think it's Thurliston Lane, is it? You could come then round through via Yenard's Farm, but I shouldn't think it's economically viable to put an exit on and off Clickers Way. But that's my question anyway. Thank you.
Would Highway just like to answer that one question, and then you can come back at the end with comments on what else has been said?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the access through the Yenards was looked at, but I understand that there's weight restrictions through the other villages that made this impractical. With regard to another access on Clickers Way, due to the temporary nature of the proposal, the Highway Authority would seek to resist a new access onto Clickers Way, and we consider the access proposals to be acceptable for the development being applied for.
Thank you. Sean.
Yeah, I can see which way this is going, but somehow the officers have come to the conclusion that it should be permitted, so I'd like to test some of the background to that. So first of all, if I could ask sort of two questions combined and then ask another two questions combined, and it is for the highways officers, so if you want to get in position for this one. How has the suitability or otherwise of Mill Lane been assessed, and can we have a figure for the current width of the road, please?
Yes, a highway officer went down on a site visit. I understand the public rights of way officer went down as well on a site visit as well. The width of Mill Lane is 3 to 4 metres, and with the grass verges it's between 9 and 11 metres. So that was considered wide enough to put the passing places or road widening in place.
Moving on from that, carrying on from that, in the measures which are proposed to make the road acceptable for lorries, what account has been taken of potential conflict with horse riders, and to what extent are any mitigating arrangements enforceable?
As far as I'm aware, there was no details of the number of horses down there, but we do acknowledge that there could be some conflict with HGVs and horses. That's why we've advised the condition of warning signs to advise HGV drivers of the presence of horses. Obviously, pedestrians could use the public right-of-way, which is an alternative route. And we would expect HGV drivers to be respectful if they come into conflict with a horse rider as well. So,
by respectful, do you mean backing up to the last passing place? And that's the question I was asking second. Is that enforceable?
I wouldn't suggest that they would reverse back up the road. I would suggest that they would stay where they are, or if I see a horse, for example, I would completely slow my car down and allow that horse to pass. So that's what more I was thinking of, which would be in accordance with the highway code, I would suspect.
I think that in certain parts of this track that is physically impossible. You could not get a lorry on there and expect somebody to squeeze a horse by it. I don't see that happening.
Sorry, yeah, I think we're speculating on the amount of time that this could happen. I don't know how often that could happen. I acknowledge it could, but it would be difficult to speculate how often that could happen on an average day, to be honest.
Okay, I'll just conclude by saying I'm not convinced there's sufficient account been taken of the potential conflict between horse riders and lorries, so I'm very much inclined to refuse this as well.
De Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. The officer said... Oh, right. The officer said that the Mill Lane is approximately 1 kilometre long. How are we going to control the lorries? If one lorry is coming off the A47 and one's leaving the tip, what's going to happen? Because they can't, I assume they can't see each other coming that length of roadway, so you could have the conflict of lorries in the middle. And what's going to happen then? So that concerns me. Also, I'd want to know how you're going to widen the road sufficiently for the horse riders and everything else. However, must bear in mind, if this was going to go to be refused and the applicant went to appeal, we've got to consider what planning grounds we're going to turn it down on. Now, we've heard that there's a business on this road, but there's no evidence before us that they actually use this lane to ride the horses. I would hope that somebody would put some evidence before us that this lane is used on a regular basis by this company. But I've got nothing before me telling me that. Also, for Mr. Cross, I'm trying to be helpful here. I'm just trying to protect our interests here. The states that the owner of the business states he would perhaps have to move from that location or something else. Is that a planning consideration or not? Is the livelihood of one company taken into account as the livelihood of another company, profitability? Is that something we can consider or not? I think we're all agreed the principle of infill. That's not a problem with the principle. I'm quite happy about the principle. But some things do concern me regarding the conflict of pedestrians, horses, HGVs, how HGVs can actually know when another one's coming up the road or down the road. And also ask the question, how's the lane been allowed to get in this condition in the first place? If it's a public highway, why has it been maintained as a public highway? Has it been allowed to get like this? So there's various questions there, but
The other question is about acoustic fencing. I understand that wasn't asked for by officers. Yet the company is going to put it in. And by the fact that they say they're going to put acoustic fencing in, to me means they know they're going to cause a nuisance, so they want to offer it in the first place. So, knowing that, also I understand there's been some question about noise from the site and other things, but that's not before us this afternoon as far as I can see. But why wasn't acoustic fencing asked for by the officers? And what sort of acoustic fencing is it going to be? There's all the different conditions that are on, which they're only as good if they're going to be enforced. I don't see how this county council is going to enforce those. If the site's being used intermittently, are they going to tell us when the site's being used? Aren't they going to tell us? Is the officer going to be available when they're using the site or not? So how can we control the conditions? Because I believe we've only got one enforcement officer at the county council. He's going to be a busy chap, isn't he?
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. We'll endeavour to get your questions answered. Mr. Bentley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, everybody's pretty well summed it all up already. I think the one thing that people have perhaps touched on, as Mr. Bolter's just done, talking about the noise. There's a Warrior 2100 here being used. Now, I don't know specifically what a Warrior 2100 is, but it's a crusher. Well, that's going to make an awful lot of noise, so hence the reason why, if this were to be permitted, which I sincerely hope it won't be, I think the acoustic fencing would be necessary. But we need to know a little bit more detail about what kind of noise is going to be generated, because a crushing machine is going to be considerably noisy. But you know, I haven't visited the site. I wish I had, because again, there's something missing up here. We're not seeing photographs, which have been very helpful for those of us who didn't visit the site. But I can't see a single reason why this should be permitted. And I'm a bit disappointed in our own highways department coming up with suggestions this is acceptable, because I can't see any way that this could be acceptable. I mean, if somebody was going to go away and come back with a proper proposal as to considerably improve Mill Lane for access, that's not what they're talking here. They're talking about filling in a few potholes. Mr. Bold said, well, what happens when two trucks, you know, we've heard about horses and trucks, but what about truck on truck? How's that going to work? It's not going to work. I mean, I'd like to move refusal on the grounds, really everybody's here summed up the reasons why it should be refused, and I'd like to sort of give it to the officers to sort of put some meat on the bones, because this has to be defendable if it ever goes to appeal. So I'm moving refusal.
Mr. Cross wants to come in. I've also probably could do with Mr. Bond summing up. Do you want Mr. Bond to go first, or you want to go first, Anthony?
Chairman, perhaps I just would go first briefly. I can always come back if necessary. Yeah. So I just want to address the committee on 3 points, if I may. Firstly, it's quite right, this matter has to be considered purely on planning grounds. So issues with regard to insurance or impact on other businesses are not planning considerations, so please do not consider those as important. I just need to say and remind members that, of course, your officers, and think of the highways officer in particular, objectively assess applications based on council policies and do no more and do no less. So they have looked at this independently, objectively, and in their professional opinion feel that the issues that are of concern that they've picked up and of which members have magnified can be addressed through appropriate conditions or legal agreements. That's their professional judgment. So they're entitled to make their judgment, and I detected perhaps one or two, which I thought was a little bit over the top, if I may say so with respect, criticism of the officers. So that's not appropriate. They're here to give professional, independent advice. Members clearly are moving towards refusing this application. That is obviously within members' gift. Members have also picked up the need for planning reasons to be given. that are sustainable should there be an appeal. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Bond, have you got anything to sum up on what's been said since you last spoke?
Thank you, Chair. There's just a few issues that have been raised that I'd just like to add to what Mr. Cross has just covered. In terms of highway visibility, I think it was Councillor Bolter that raised the issue of one HGV coming in from the Clickers Way and one coming out of the site, and how can they see each other? Well, I think members will appreciate from the site visit that a HGV driver is sat significantly higher in a cab than a minibus and a car user. But the road is reasonably straight, and as far as I know, Highway Authority officers will have considered intervisibility between the passing bays and widening areas. So I think that's been considered by the Highway Authority as being acceptable. With regard to the proposed crusher, the noise from a crusher, absolutely right. Councillor Bentley raises a valid point that noise from crushers can be considerable. A noise assessment was submitted with the application that considered noise impacts from the site, and the environmental health officers raised no objection. The site itself is relatively well distanced from any local property, and there is a separate condition. Condition 7 seeks to restrict crushing operations to between 7 and 5 Monday to Friday, and that's fairly standard with most conditions that refer to crushers at any waste site. So I think that's been covered and is acceptable. I'll just check. Yeah. Condition 7 also restricts vehicle movements to between 7 in the morning and 5 at night in terms of HGV movements, Monday to Friday. That's something members need to be aware of. They may not be satisfied with that, but they should be aware that the condition is proposed to limit the impacts of those. And finally, the acoustic fencing, it was proposed following concerns raised by the owner of Murfield Farm. It was proposed, I think it's fair to say, on a sort of without prejudice basis. I don't think they were accepting as an applicant that there was a significant, or should I say unacceptable noise impact from HGVs. They were offering that up as a bit of planning gain and to try and help the occupiers of Murfield Farm. But other than that, I've got nothing else to add unless John has.
Mr. Bolter.
Chair, is the map before us correct on page 9? If it is, it's not a straight road. So you could not see a lorry entering the site or leaving the quarry. There's a number of bends in that, so you can't see what's coming. So I'm sorry, but I can't accept that argument because you can't see. The other point is that it was given as evidence by one of the speakers about the Horse Federation, I forget, that's just our Horse Society, about this 50 metres. Have the officers taken that into account at all? I've not seen that evidence. And if they're not seeing the evidence and everything else, perhaps a deferment to all information has been put before us might be the way forward, because there's lots of things here that officers say they haven't seen some information from people, they haven't received it. I'm concerned we've got to make a decision without all the information being before us to make a decision on. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Mr. Jennings.
Well, actually, Councillor Bolter's more or less said exactly what I was going to say. Let's be quite clear, I do not like this application, but that is not a reason for refusing it. And everything else I've heard this afternoon, of all the statutory consultations, or consultees, there is no objection from anybody. we need some strong grounds to refuse this. And I'm with Bill on this. I think we need to defer it, such as this report that they say has been sent in. Well, has it or hasn't it? I want to see it. And I think there again, to defer it for 1 month, or I shouldn't perhaps give a time scale on this, but we ain't got the information we need quite simply to make a decision, in my opinion.
Thank you, David. I've got Mrs. Wright, I think, next. I don't really want to keep going round and round in circles like a teddy bear. I think... sorry?
Nobody's proposed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the proposal for deferment, I was going to ask Mr. Cross to give us some sort of ruling on that, David, Mr. Bolter. Mr. Cross.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So at the moment, what you have before you is an officer recommendation to approve subject conditions and legal agreement, but now from a member's perspective, a decision to refuse, which has been moved and seconded. So the guidance I can give you with regard to the current situation with regard to the motion for refusal is that you do need to be clear about your planning reasons as to why that's being done. At the moment, that's not really as clear as it could be. So the options available would be, in those circumstances, to have a short adjournment to enable the planning officers and myself with Highways colleagues to just to get the sense of what members are saying and perhaps put together what we think are the reasons that you want to use as refusal. But we would need about 5 or 10 minutes for that, please, and then come back, and then if that's acceptable, you would then move on. But
just let Mr. Cross.
But thanks,
Just
Mr. Bolter.
let Mr. Cross
I was
finish.
moving on to my second point, which was that that's one way of dealing with it. Or secondly, at the moment there is no amendment on the table, but if an amendment is moved and seconded to defer, then you would decide the amendment first, and then if that was agreed, or not the case may be, you could then move on to the original motion. So that's permissible, taking that as an amendment first of all, though. I have to end up with 3 votes.
So I think it looks to me as though we're going to take an amendment then to defer, which was proposed by Mr. Jennings and seconded by Mr. Bolter, I believe, or vice versa. I'm not sure it matters which way, but it's on, I think the intentions are honourable anyway, whichever one. So all in favour of deferment then? Against? What's next, Mr. Cross? I'm afraid I won't.
Move to the next agenda, I think.
Will you also be looking at reasons for refusal at the same time?
Well, Chairman, the short answer is no, unless the officer's recommendation should change in the meantime. But otherwise, I would anticipate the recommendation would remain for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Sorry, next agenda item, which is item 8. This is being dealt with by Mr. Larter. Variation conditions to hours of operation at Watling Street, Hinckley. Mr. Larter.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application at the Hinckley Service Centre, south of the A5, operated by Veolia. The application is to extend the current working hours by 1 hour in the morning on Mondays to Saturdays, so starting from 6 o'clock rather than the current 7 o'clock. The site is split by the county boundary, which is shown as the thin black line running on the slide in front of you, so that only the parking areas and the front of the site offices are actually in Leicestershire. However, the nearest properties to the site are all in Leicestershire on the other side of the A5. The main issues from the change of hours are the effect of HGVs entering the site, both to do with noise and highway safety. We are in receipt of 4 representations objecting to the proposal. There have been no objections from statutory consultees, and importantly the Environmental Health Officer, the Highway Authority and Highways England do not object to the proposal, and it is considered that with the conditions the proposal would be acceptable and therefore is recommended for approval subject to those conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Larter. There is a letter or a note been tabled from Mr. Bill, which we've all received. Comments from the floor? No? Sorry? Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the problem has been early starting, as we were told this morning. There have been complaints locally, and our environmental health officers have not been able to nail it down, but it seems like they've been starting at 4:30, as we were told this morning. The only thing that I would like is that if there are complaints, that there is some sort of contact that local residents can complain to, because at the minute it seems they don't know where to go. So if there could be a local contact or a phone number or something like that, where if they do starting at 4:30 in the morning, loading skips again, then we can sort it. Because as we heard earlier, our enforcement officer can't be down there every day. And if you've got somebody that's not very reliable with conditions are only as good as the people that want to honour them, because we just haven't got the manpower to man them. So if that's the only thing I've got, Chairman, is that if there's some sort of contact locally with the company or environmental health that residents can complain to, then that's fine. I haven't got a problem with the site at all.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Crooks. Is that possible?
Yes, Mr. Crooks is entirely correct. They have breached their conditions. In light of the representations received, there was complaints. The company has admitted it. In discussions with myself, they have promised they won't do it again. If they do it again, they'll be subject to a breach of condition notice, I'm afraid. That will be the action taken. In terms of any contact details, all the neighbour letters that went out have my name, address, phone number and email on, and people were pretty rapid in coming to me. Those who I followed up the complaints with have been told that they can come to me direct in future rather than going to anyone else, because I now have both of the contact details of the site and the operations manager.
Thank you, Mr. Larter. Mr. Bolter.
Is there not a liaison group between the company and the residents, or should there be one? So that they've got some mechanism together to contact officers. But of course, officers only work Monday to Friday in working hours. what happens at weekends?
Mr. Larter or Mr.
Well,
Right.
I can answer that. First of all, on working hours, you're correct. Officers are only working Monday to Friday and are available to do site visits unless in very extreme circumstances when we would make an exception to that. Regards a liaison committee, we do operate liaison committees at a number of quarries and waste sites. We haven't got one at this site because essentially the operations are in Warwickshire with the access in Leicestershire. It hasn't been deemed necessary. Normally we would require a liaison committee as part of granting a planning permission. I don't think in this case the type of application it is to vary a start time would be a justification for requiring a liaison committee in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Jennings and Mr. Bentley proposed it and seconded it. I think I've got that right. If there's no other speakers, we'll move to the vote on this one. Yes. All in favour? That looks to be unanimous then. Thank you very much. That's the sort of the last agenda item on the... Dan.
Mr. Chairman, I hope it's opportune, just as the meeting's closing, to make a request that we could return back to the photographs of planning applications, because I found them extremely helpful and they were very, very professional and presented extremely well, which actually helps us in our consideration. And I think by what we did on Tuesday, then looking today at just lines on a map, it really brought it home to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Well, we'll treat that under item 9.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, not at all. No. Okay. Item 10 is Chairman's announcements. Well, I'm going to say thank you very much for coming and Merry Christmas. Thank you. And close the meeting, of course.